I'm Howard Gladstone, an artist in the Light of Day Language of Landscape show at Westbeth Gallery, 55 Bethune Street, New York City. The show is running to April 1st, 2022. The show includes Tema Bell, William Christine, Lois Dodd, Diane Drescher, John Goodrich, Elizabeth Higgins, Albert Kresch, Stanley Lewis, Elizabeth O'Reilly, Tony Serio, Camilla Talbot, and myself. I'm sad to say that one of the artists in the exhibition passed away this last weekend. Albert Kresch was a wonderful and beloved artist, teacher, and father. He was one of the original members of the Jane Street Gallery. And as a student of Hans Hofmann, he got to know Leland Bell and Louisa Matthias Dotter, Tema's parents. Among his friends were Robert De Niro, William de Kooning, Jean Elion, Frank O'Hara, and Denise Levertov. He won a Fulbright Fellowship in 1953 and taught at Parsons and showed at Salinger O'Reilly Gallery and Lowen-Gadud Gallery. His daughter, Elizabeth, helped us prepare for this show, and Al passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 99 years old. I'd like to thank Elizabeth Kresch, the Westbeth Artists Residence Council, Maurice Poppy, Alexander Gallery, Betty Cunningham Gallery, and a very special thanks to the curator of our show, Karen Wilkin. Karen Wilkin is a New York-based curator and critic specializing in 20th century modernism. She was educated at Barnard College and Columbia University. She spent extensive time in Italy on a Fulbright Fellowship. Karen is the author and contributor to monographs on Anthony Caro, David Smith, Helen Frankenthaler, Hans Hofmann, Giorgio Morandi, George Brock, Fairfield Porter, Wayne Thiebaud, and others. Along with Sandler, and William Agee, she organized a touring exhibition, American Vanguard, John Graham, Stuart Davis, Achille Gorky, William de Kooning, and their circle 1927 to 1942. It was selected the best exhibition of 2012 by the Boston Globe. She's the contributing editor along with Stuart Davis and Hans Hofmann. She was the contributing editor to a catalog race day on Stuart Davis and Hans Hofmann. She writes regularly for Hopkins Review, Hudson Review, The New Criterion, The Wall Street Journal. Ms. Wilkin teaches at the MFA program in New York Studio School. And after the presentation, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button on your screen. And remember to mute your devices. I am honored and thrilled to welcome Karen Wilkin.
Thank you, Howard, for that very generous introduction. I'm honored and thrilled to have been part of this project. And it was a real joy when it came back to life after having closed down because of COVID. The theme of this show is, I suppose, a double one. Contemporary artists who are expanding the tradition of landscape painter, united, this is the double part, united by their connections to Al Kresch, Lois Dodd, and Stanley Lewis. Just about everybody in this group either studied with, was mentored by, is connected in some way to these three artists. So that's the, I suppose, connective tissue, but each one of these artists is a distinct individual with a very personal approach to the theme of landscape. What I want to do now is very briefly talk about a little bit about the history of landscape and give you all a very quick overview of what's in the show. I hope many of you have seen it. I hope more of you will see it. But for those of you who for some reason haven't or can't, at least you'll get some of the images. So I'm going to share my screen if all goes well. Okay. It probably would not have been possible to have organized a show like this in 1834. For centuries, landscape was a kind of addendum. I can't remember which art historian talked about landscape entering painting through a window in Renaissance portraits. Of course, people were painting the landscape, but they were painting it as a background. And when young artists went to Rome to hone their skills, having won a Rome prize, they were supposed to go out and paint from the landscape, because then they would be painting the places where history took place, where mythology was supposed to have been enacted, which meant that the backgrounds in their history paintings, their large scale paintings of figures enacting scenes from the ancient past and from mythology, would have backgrounds that were accurate. I remember reading a wonderful exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art organized by Peter Galassi about these early plein air landscape paintings done by academicians, that one of the heads of the academy in the 19th century wrote back and said, "I'm surprised that some of our less talented students don't want to concentrate on landscape." Well, what changed all of that was Corot, who, like all the other young artists in Italy, was going out and doing these plein air responses to different times of day, different kinds of weather. A very important 18th century manual for artists advised them to do this, because they said you can learn things about color out of doors that you can't do in the studio. And then there was a list of things that you were supposed to study. It was advisable to study a volcanic eruption at least once. That should be part of everyone's vocabulary. Well, Corot took these direct and marvelous views he did of Italy, and he convinced it that these were finished paintings in their own right, worthy of being paid attention to. And of course, the rest is abstract, is impressionism, and I don't have to go into that. More directly related to the artists in this show is the precedent set by Edward Hopper, the American landscape, apparently ordinary, nondescript places like a gas station, like a small town street, somehow made incredibly important by virtue of the artist having spent time looking at it. And the same kind of sensitivity to specific qualities of light and specific moments of the year that we see in the artists in this show. A more immediate influence or predecessor in terms of time is Fairfield Porter, who at a time when abstraction was deemed to be imperative, when if you wanted to be a serious artist, you had to be an abstract artist, Porter said, no, absolutely not. That's not what I'm going to do. And painting things that are, if you ended up taking a picture of two armchairs on a porch, well, this is, quite well composed, but often Porter's paintings look like the sort of thing that if they turned up on a group of photographs, you discard them because they were not of things of interest, and yet he makes them magical. Well, that's our preamble. Here are works from the show. I'm just going to go through quickly. Here are two of Al Kresch's works. We have a number of them. This marvelous intensity, which he kept up right to the end. Lois Dodd, who has been such an important precedent for so many of the artists in this show, Lois Dodd, who at exactly the same moment that it was deemed that abstraction was the only way to go, was painting cows in a field in Maine. And the rest, as they say, is art history. These extraordinary paintings of places that are, again, transformed by the intensity and the affection of her scrutiny in different kinds of weather at different times of year. There's a whole series of paintings of this. You call it a hackmatack. I'd call it an Eastern larch, but we're talking about the same thing.
Tamarack, also tamarack.
Also tamarack, exactly. These amazing trees that have needles that turn golden in the fall, and then they lose all their needles. They're not supposed to be deciduous, but they are. Stanley Lewis, another important teacher for many of the people in this show, turning his attention on his yard, areas near him. When he teaches at Chautauqua, he goes and looks at the edge of the lake, just paying attention to the neighborhood. Similarly, Tema Bell, who, as you can see, even in this brief selection, is returning to the same place at a different time of year. Now, also different seasons, different things happen, but here is this beautiful landscape which she keeps examining in new ways. And each one of these artists approaches perception and the world around them in a different way. William Christine is just as much involved with perceptual painting as Tema Bell, but it comes out very differently. You have this dissection of the landscape and coming very close to things, translating them into marks and color. Diane Drescher, who is using the urban landscape as her theme. So here's a painting. Would you call this a landscape necessarily if you didn't know better? You know, this is looking at a building in Washington Heights. Look what she calls it. It's a landscape. It's an urban landscape. Park landscape, Western landscape, always with some man-made element for contrast. Howard Gladstone, also very attuned to nuances of light and very, not to take anything away from his originality, but a very Hopper-esque kind of mood of you feel if you went up that hill, you might fall off the edge of the world there. Or there, you know? Incredibly evocative of small town, Northeastern America. Similarly, John Goodrich, focusing his attention on the way the natural world is often framed by the built environment or contrasted by the most ordinary thing in the light of day. Elizabeth Higgins, very much simplifying things, reducing her things to their most essential, you know, sky, water, little bit of land, and different every time. Elizabeth O'Reilly, who also likes to have something man-made in her work, whether it is something as enigmatic as this mailbox or something slightly more familiar, such as the corner of a building. And yet she looks for that same architecture in the natural world. Tony Isario, who is also involved with the urban landscape. He's, I think, the only person in this show who has figures in his landscapes. people occupy the places that he paints. I don't think that's true of anybody else. And Camilla Talbot, who takes yet a different approach, often coming, shattering and fragmenting the landscape into a series of marks, but still disciplining it with a sense of natural space at different scales, sometimes coming up close and sometimes backing off completely. So that's a very quick overview of the show. I'm going to race back and then we're going to start talking about it. Okay, here we are. Everyone here knew Al, and I'm sure has something to say about him and about these. He's a very important figure for a lot of people. I got to know him through my work on Hoffman, and we had a marvelous panel once with Al and Paul Resica, who were two of the last Hoffman students remaining. And Paul Resica was reminiscing about his time as at Hoffman School when he was still a teenager. And Al kept saying, no, 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 you got it wrong, Paul. It wasn't like that. It was like this. It was a very entertaining evening.
Elizabeth?
Well, Albert Crash.
Oh, I'm here.
Oh. Go ahead.
I think Lois was asking for some help from Elizabeth.
Yeah, I've got this
So if you have something to
thing
say,
right on the top of everything and this message. Get that damn
Sure.
thing off. Yeah, yeah.
Elizabeth Higgins, did you have something to say?
Yes, I was
Sure.
just going to say that Al Crash, was my teacher at the Parsons School of Fine Art and the MFA program in painting. And he was just such a marvelous teacher, as well as being, one of the kindest men I've ever known. And he, along with Leland and Paul Resica, Leland Bell, Temma's father, espoused the idea of learning how to paint, learning how to see. I came to that program because I had been an abstract painter and I felt like I wanted to learn what the Fauves knew. And Al in particular was always teaching us how to see the light and look for the vast forms first before going into detail. So he will be sorely missed by all.
No,
He's
this
an
is-
amazing teacher.
This is certainly an example of going for the big forms first. in
Yes.
This painting.
I remember him telling me once that when you're looking at, you're doing a face or the eyes aren't the same. One eye is different than the other eye. I always remember that.
Lois and I were talking about him today and saying his work is not like anybody else's. It's really very different to every other painter. His color is so vibrant.
And he was a really modest person in person, just a really gentle man. So it's funny how bold his paintings are. He's pretty fearless as a painter.
I'm interested that he would, how he painted, he'd get in his car and drive out upstate or something and then plop down at some place and paint, right quickly. I mean, he was sort of on the go. He wasn't casual, but he would go out and anyway, something like that.
Yeah.
That's an interesting point you've raised, Stanley. I'm going to throw it out at the rest of you, not to take anything away from Al, who we could talk about for the whole hour, but how do the rest of you choose your motifs? Do you go out and seek them out the way he did? Are they things that just kind of catch your eye? What happens? Lois, you very often seem to paint things that are out your window or in your yard or
Yeah,
across the
passive, yeah.
street.
I go, well, the one on the left is downtown, the Williamsburg, one of the bridges. And a friend and I went down, set ourselves up and just painted on the spot. And so most of these paintings that I do outside are like 3-hour stints. And that's about all that I want to spend. And I don't go back the next day and look at it again because the weather's going to be different, the light's going to be different, whatever that is that would be different. So it has to be done in one go in a matter of 2 or 3 hours. So they're all small, the ones on the panels, and they can be done that rapidly. So that I used to go with a friend and we'd drive for maybe a distance and then park and paint. But as the years go on, at this point, I just more or less open the door and go out. And I don't go anywhere. I just look out either the window or, don't go far at all. And it's always different. It seems that you never run out of motifs, so to speak, because the time of year, the time of day, the objects that are sitting around like that, it's always different. And so landscape is very good in that regard.
The leaves come off to change color, they come off the trees.
I want to
Right.
make a remark about Lois's, the painting that really strikes me is two back, go back to,
That one?
no, the next one back, where there are two paintings on there.
Yeah.
I'm really excited by this painting and the way of the one on the right, especially. That's the one I'm looking at. The way the black shape on the left with the angle on it, which, in a way, the roof line, the angled roof, how that's so exciting, the way it just goes up like that, and all the elements, bang, that's a look how the top on the building on the right, you have the whatever, the molding, and it just touches the green. There must be kind of a lawnmower or something, but that is a killer painting, Lois.
Well, that's just the way it looks, Stanley.
Yeah,
I'm only a reporter. I only report.
yeah, but
exactly what I see.
well, yes, but you do it in a special way that makes it full of energy. Definitely.
I'm glad.
There are reporters and reporters, Lois.
All right. Okay.
Do you ever use these small on the spot studies as the basis for larger paintings, or not anymore?
On the spot studies of what?
Do you use these studies as the basis for larger paintings done in the studio?
I don't think, no, it seems that it doesn't carry over for me. In the transferring, it kind of would die. So the big ones are usually big to begin with, and the little ones just say small. There are a lot more small ones because they're more portable, and it's much freer to be able to go out with just small panels than the bigger paintings. I used to do in Maine, where I am in the summer, there's a woods across the road, so I was able to take rather large canvases over there, prop them up against a tree, tie them to the tree, leave them overnight, and work on bigger things. But that was like one of the exceptional occasions when I could do that kind of thing. Otherwise, it'd have to be in the barn outside. And I
quite an
love
undertaking.
outside. I really prefer to work outside
Mhm.
at all times.
Stanley,
So
you, go ahead.
sorry. I was going to say, in terms of motifs, I do better if I'm very familiar with the place. I don't do well as a tourist, you know, a new place every day. The more I get to know a place, the more, you know, motifs I can find. Like, you know, get used to a place and then see the next composition. Just turn a little bit and see something else.
Mhm.
That's interesting. You should say that, Elizabeth, because oftentimes I will be walking where I live and be struck by the landscape in a different way. So even though I've seen the same thing for years and years, as you had said before, it's how the light hits it in a certain way, or if the landscape, the painting of mine across the river, I walked down that river road every day for 30 years, but one day I saw it through 2 planes of hedges, and I thought, wow, these hedges act as an almost like a window, an architectural device. And it, I don't know if you can bring that up on screen.
Getting
But
to it. It's a little, there we go.
There, yeah.
Yeah.
So those are almost, you could see the Matisse-like quality in those flat panels with the shadows below.
Mhm.
But it's just funny how sometimes I don't necessarily search for a motif. Sometimes I just am sensitive to my surroundings, and something strikes me that hasn't struck me before. And it's just a way for me to begin a painting, you know, and then the painting takes over. So it's a different process from Lois's. It's not a one-shot deal. Often it's not, if that makes sense.
You know, I wanted to jump in and say, because the most important thing that Al Kresh, it's so important for me, and I can't tell you how much it means to me. He said, just paint your backyard. And I actually said, because I think, oh man, you should be out going downtown and you should be going here. And the fact that he said that to me makes me feel like it's okay, you know.
Right.
Incredibly important that he just made that one remark.
Mhm. Well,
me,
sometimes you do venture out a little bit further.
Yeah, if I have, if I'm, but the it's amazing how remarks from people can be so important. Just one sentence.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Well, you've certainly taken full advantage of that idea. Some wonderful
I
paintings.
know, and I still worry about it. I mean, I think, God, what am I out here again?
Yeah. But these are not 3-hour paintings. Anything
No,
but.
that's another issue that, in a way, we can't really get into here. But what happened for me was I had a problem. I was sort of taught through Leland and Al, really, in a way, to see. It's the idea of the big areas versus looking into small things. And somehow I realize I see so much when I look at a tree, for instance. I see all the leaves, but so what's the, and then Leland said once, he said, you know, Courbet painted every leaf. That was an important idea that he said that, because, so anyway, I switched and decided, and I feel a little weird about it. But I definitely do. It's like crazy or something, but anyway.
Stanley, you probably don't remember me, but you taught me, Leland taught me, Paul taught me, and you all sort of, Leland and Paul were talking about the big sweeps of planes and color and form. And we were never to go into detail until we got all those things down first. I
Well,
think
you
it's
know, the
very-
most important thing, Elizabeth, about rules is that there are no rules. Or if you
Exactly.
make rules for yourself, you break them.
That's why it's so refreshing for me personally to listen to Lois and how she has such conviction in her 3-hour, stints.
Well,
at
look
an
at the
easel.
results. Why shouldn't she?
Exactly.
No, that's
Yeah.
that's
But
the
Stanley, I mean, this painting is a very dramatic example of your slicing into things, expanding them, adding layers, changing things. It's not just that you're painting a lot of detail, you are constructing this world spatially in a way that I don't think anyone else does.
I have there's sort of an anecdote about this painting that I might as well say, because it shows what landscape painters are up against. And we're all, I love the idea that we're all landscape painters, which means we like to be outside, or we basically, yes, we want to be outside or be looking outside. So when I set up to do this painting, this is in Mayville, during the summer, there were trees all over on the right. There were 3 huge trees going all up, where those cars are. It was looking through a bank of trees. And the second day I got out there, the crew came in and cut down the trees while I was standing there. And I gotta say,
You cursed the tree, Stanley, by painting them.
that's what we're all,
It's
why
a-
we're all unified together is we're out there and then stuff happens while we're there.
Yeah.
And you gotta figure out,
Right.
and you just say, okay, basically, whatever happens, happens. It's very much a thing of letting it all happen, whatever, it's a very cool philosophy of life, like whatever is there, that's gonna be a good painting.
Mhm.
And what's interesting is that so much is happening.
yeah,
You go out
Yeah.
there, paint a scene, and the next thing you know, they're cutting the tree. I mean, things are always changing right in front of you when you're
Right.
trying to paint. Yeah.
I that often it opens up a painting when something changes, and so you
Right.
kind of something that you've you let it go, but then there's a big change, and you have
Are
to
you
rethink it.
speaking from experience?
Yes, I am.
Anything happened here?
Well, I can say, hey, Howard, I can say one thing. See those shadows there? Well, they weren't there at the 2 hours before. Those
Yeah.
shadows, man, they were only there for about 10 minutes.
Right.
How do
Well,
you
yes,
deal with that?
The weather did change. I mean, the sun was coming in and out, and so I was able to choose. Actually, I was,
Yeah.
do I want a really bright, hot day or something a little bit, more subdued? It was good to have the alternative.
Totally. I get it.
So how I was thinking about Stanley's painting of the deck chair, and I was saying he puts on so much paint that you could practically sit in that chair right in the painting.
Well, that deck chair hasn't gone anywhere in 4 years.
Yeah.
It is
2011 painting.
But it is fraying, and I have to put another chair in there now, actually.
Wow.
It's worn out.
But whatever happens, happens, Stanley. You just
Right,
said
right.
so yourself.
Right. I know.
So
mean-
I'm now looking at the slicing in this painting as a metaphor for the trees being cut down.
Oh, God.
Uh,
Stanley, do you see, have a prevision of what the painting is going to be, or do you just get to work and engage with it?
No, I think I do what absolutely everybody in this show does is and I know it's hard to talk about it, but, and I think Carmela talked about it. You see something and then that's it. You know, I saw these scenes because I would take a class out there to that park in Mayville, and I draw and I'd look around, and then you see what am I saying here? You definitely, things come to you like in a shot, and that's the main thing. I think you want it to you first have the idea, it comes to you, and then you paint it. That's what I think.
Okay.
What does anybody else think?
Well, sometimes I don't see something until I start working.
Yeah,
It's
that's
kind
the
of
other
like my
way.
mind doesn't engage. So it's kind of like, and then, like I won't see something, and then I'll be working on this painting, and then I'll turn around and I'll see 10 paintings to do. It's,
Mhm.
it's really a matter of my mind engaging.
Yeah, when your mind gets excited,
Yeah.
I agree. It's not I'm making it too like a rule thing.
There's something to be said too for the pressure of painting outdoors, which is a motivating factor. You know, it's like
Totally.
you have to get something done because this is going to go, or that, something, the sky will change, or and also if you're going to a particular place for a couple of hours, you just there's something pressure that helps you to get started, and
Mhm.
in that isn't in the studio when there are objects sitting on a table. You could take all day and several days. I need that pressure, I think.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Tama, you seem to work in a different way because you keep returning to the same place. It's as though you've got the architecture there and you can concentrate on the changes and the nuance. I'm reminded of Ken Nolan telling me once he figured out that if he acknowledged the center of his paintings, this is when he first started working on the circles, then he could concentrate on what really interested him, which was interval and color and edges, and he didn't have to think about the structure. I feel a little bit as though you're taking advantage of something similar in these paintings.
Well, I like to paint things that I have been looking at, for that are part of my existence, either, here on the farm, or when I'm in Iceland. There's certain views that I've painted that I've seen them so much, and they're sort of like part of me. But of course, every time you paint them, they're different, but they have to have a certain meaning for me. I feel I used to go out and paint different things, but then as I got older, I feel like I want to concentrate more on things that I actually feel and know about somehow.
Well, I think to me, they're wonderful paintings. I keep thinking of Bruegel. They kind of unfold like Bruegels rhythmically. So there's large elements, small elements, but you go from one to the other, and you just keep on going in and in. They seem very complete and whole for me.
Me too.
Too nice, too kind.
But isn't that a great thing in this painting, the way the tree and the road or the diagonal going up? That's so great, the way that just locks in there.
And it does something similar in a different way in this smaller, this wonderful little snow painting. I had to put this in. We needed a change of season.
Yeah, and we have snow here. We got many inches of snow. Yes.
It's got to be spring one of these days.
Yeah.
The animals are so fabulous, Tema. The way they're so different. There's so many ways they are. They're small, and we have a lot of Tema's animal. Karen has bought from Tema these animal pictures and we gave them to our grandchildren, and they're all, so we see them all the time. We have a couple of a pig and they're so, we have a great rooster picture of Tema's.
Sounds lucky you. Well, This was the only animal picture in the show, but I insisted on putting it in here.
No,
So as I say, a very different approach to landscape. There isn't, I guess this is as close, this and Camilla are as close as you get to abstract as you can find in this painting, but there's in this show, but they're all very rooted in perception in the same way.
yeah.
Yeah, that one on the left of Bill's, I think it's amazing, the space that's in there in addition to those
Yeah.
abstract strong shapes.
Yeah. Well, you know, there are those wonderful burnouts that are made from his house in the south of
Mhm.
France, where you
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
those close thing, and then miles and miles going to the sea.
Oh, I love
And
those.
it's
Mhm.
very much the same kind of space in this,
Yeah.
Mm, yeah.
which it makes us very special.
But the one on the right is more like that. That is the most abstract painting maybe in the show that I can
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
But I'm
And-
sure that
Oh, but-
everything there was somehow triggered by something that was seen.
Yeah, because he's probably looking down at the garden, but it's so terrific how the garden is going up. Anyway,
Mhm.
there's that tension there.
Yeah. You know, the watercolors are brilliant.
Yeah.
And I mean, these are so specific to place. I mean, you know exactly, I think even if you didn't have the piece of the George Washington Bridge there, you'd be very, very, you know, this is Manhattan. And of course, nature's inside. It's only man-made outside, except for the clouds.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Mm,
And it's very much in, you know, it makes me think of a tradition of painters like Jane Freilicher with a
Mhm.
plant, you know, the inside and the outside,
Yeah.
the interior and then the city behind.
No, it's in,
Does anybody know the painter George Rose? Wait, no. He painted these sort of pointillist paintings from his window. I don't think I have the right name. It's not George Rose. That's somebody else. Oh, well, sorry.
come to you. It'll come to you. I was so interested when we were
Somebody-
installing the show, how, you know, in a sense, this Anasazi ruin and this escarpment in Fort Tryon Park, how the structure is so similar, you know, it's the same eye choosing this.
Yeah, very cool.
Even
Right.
though
So
they're-
someone in the just to say, someone in the Q&A is asking if it's Herman Rose, you mean, Stanley?
Herman Rose, that's it. Yeah,
Yes.
Herman
Okay.
Rose.
Herman
Thanks to
Rose,
Susan Shevlov.
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
I,
Ah,
I liked it. I saw his paintings in a magazine article in Art News, and I just liked them. And then, but I never met him, or I haven't seen hardly any of his paintings. But I always think about him.
That's interesting. Uh,
mm,
I was thinking too, like, you know, Temma looks out in her yard on her farm, and Camilla does the same thing. She seems to have a little pond that she goes to all the time. That's she's very familiar with.
mhm.
But she has a different approach, really.
Howard, was this a place that you were spending a lot of time, or a place that you would go to?
Yes, well, I returned to a residency in Pennsylvania. Now it's been 4 or 5 times. And it's a place called Mishapen, and it's a very rural place. And the town is kind of dying. Every time I go back, there's like one less business downtown, and pretty much the only business that's remaining downtown is the used cars. And it kind of became a metaphor for me that, you know, it was kind of like a, you know, the feeling of it being a used car. And the roads, I kind of love the work that
Yeah,
year.
that's so interesting.
I
The
love the
roads.
road. Yeah, I would take
Yeah,
a
and
walk, actually.
was just going to say, in person, that painting on the left, that road really glows beautifully. It's a little hard to see in the reproduction.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
road
there's
stuff.
a rise. I thought it was kind of funny because there's signs telling you what's going to happen next in the road. You really can't. It's called Snake Hill Road, and you really can't see what's going to happen beyond at the rise or beyond the bend, and so they have signs warning you.
I was going to say, I think what Stanley, you said about William Christine's most abstract painting, it's being the most abstract painting in the show, that makes me think of how all of these paintings, even though there is reference to the landscape, if you were to dissect them and look at them in a formalist, sort of a formal way, they are in fact very abstract. I mean, in terms of form and use of color and shape and rhythm, all those things, even though there's a reference to the landscape, I don't know, when I approach painting, I'm always working in that kind of abstract way.
Every painting is abstract.
Yeah, but so that's why I think that's a good, I've had people come to me and say, I find landscape painting boring. And I think that's a shame, because they're not seeing all those abstract qualities that go into the making of a painting that happens to be based on the landscape. So I'm glad the landscape as a motif isn't dying. And I hope I'm just so happy to be part of this exhibit with all of you guys.
Now, the contemporary landscape is certainly not dying, and what here is living proof that it doesn't have to be beautiful and bucolic to be an exciting painting.
You know, one thing about John's painting here on the right, he really nailed that pickup truck.
It's a knockout truck.
And that's hard to do. And the way he compressed that truck somehow into that painting is.
Trucks are great to paint. No, I have a lot of students who will not paint cars or trucks, and I can't figure out why. I mean, well, they're so interesting because they're very reflective. I mean, they don't have a inert mass of their own in a way. It's all reflections and all different curving body panels and so forth. But of course, they come together and make that very solid object. But they're great to paint.
They are great. I agree completely. And you know, looking through that window, that light green through the window, and then the seat thing that sticks up, the way that sort of is, you know, pushing against that box that's above it on the house, whatever that is a very exciting area. That's
well, Elizabeth was talking about these having an abstract structure. I mean, this is like a lesson in how to find the geometry in the world around you, you know, and then you get this little kink of the tire, you know, it's exciting painting.
It's really interesting to me that we do learn to see. I mean, we're born without any recognition at all of objects, except maybe a human face. And so we learn what the planes of a house are, or what the floor is as opposed to the wall. So it is all learned. So we're going back to learned experiences whenever we see something. And, you know, and so many artists have said you're trying to see with the eyes of a child again. But Bonnard and Monet and Picasso and the other thing I think is that I've had quite a few students who will say at one point, "Oh, it's abstract," and I always want to say, "Yes, it was always abstract."
Yeah.
Welcome to painting. It is.
Yeah,
It is an equivalent.
It's like the character in the Molière play, the bourgeois gentilhomme, who discovers that he's been speaking prose all his life.
So when I'm in Brooklyn, if I something gets in my way, some yellow van, and I'm like wishing it would go, and then I give in and go, all right, I have to paint it, it's here. As sure as I do that, it takes off.
Well, nothing got in your way for these paintings, Elizabeth.
No,
These
Yeah.
were, nothing got in your way of this.
but now,
Yeah,
Elizabeth,
that's-
these are oil paintings, not, and for a while you were doing a lot of watercolors, right?
I seem to get hired to teach a lot of watercolor, but oils are a little easier, so they're so when I go out, I take my oils. But this is a barbecue actually on the
It's a
beach.
barbecue. Oh,
It's a barbecue, and there's foil
How
on
did
the
you
handles.
figure
but
that one out? How did you decide to paint that?
it's just such a great object. It's intriguing to me.
yeah.
Yeah. And then
The way the
you know,
horizon
because-
line behind cuts
Yeah.
through.
Yeah.
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 What's-
And then the base of it is kind of buried in the sand, and yeah.
What's
They have a whole
interesting,
bunch of them.
that what's interesting is because of the viewpoint and the way the horizon is bisecting, you have no idea of the size of this thing. It could
Right.
be
I know.
monumental.
It's very
Yeah.
enigmatic.
Mm.
And then I thought, since it is an enigmatic subject, I thought I would give it an enigmatic title.
Well, it worked. It worked.
Single.
Bingo.
It's a very potent little painting.
It is.
Thank you.
And here, now the fact that only these paintings have figures in them, what's the story with the rest of you?
Well, Karen, when Howard approached me to be in this show, it was landscape painting. So I do many works with the figure in it. I just didn't submit anything.
Okay.
That
I
was
know
the
that's interesting.
landscape.
I was wondering whether it was a choice or a selection. But I mean, why
Yeah,
shouldn't
no,
why shouldn't
I
a
rarely,
landscape painting have a figure in it?
it's true. And I've been asked that before. And for a while I thought, you're right, I should try to put figures in. So I started looking at paintings that I really cared about from history with figures in them, and thought, okay, I'll make a translation, or I'll take these figures there and think about their relationship to those trees and put them with my trees. And I ended up with these like anachronistic Van Gogh woman in a long dress walking through my painting. So, but it was actually an interesting exercise to just, really observe and try to place those figures in my setting.
But here it's so, I mean, the figure and the traffic sign, and this is all so much of a piece, the way these trees, the young trees inhabit the street. And all
Tony.
held together with this
I
big
hope
arch.
Do you think Tony is there? Or I have seen a lot of shows of Tony's work. I love his paintings, and he paints in that great area up on the
Washington Heights.
Yeah, I mean, what a spot he has. What I am so envious of that. I mean, look at these things he has to paint. I mean, they're incredible. But one thing about the figures in the paintings is, I'm sure it's the same for everybody. You don't. So somebody is walking, and then you have to decide, well, I'm going to put it in because they're not there anymore. I mean, it's a very strange and unsettling experience for a landscape painter, that when figures move through, because you want to put a figure in, and then it's just like you have to make a decision right there, and then of course they're not there anymore, so you have to kind of fake it. Well, what was it?
Well,
Maybe
so Stanley, that makes me think, did you never work from memory? In other words, you saw that figure when you were painting. The figure is no longer there, but why not put the figure back in?
Oh, no, I mean, I would, but I'd see it. Well, not everybody's this way, but you see the figures, and then you want to put them in, but you're not sure if you should. That's what I go through. car drives,
Ah.
especially cars, you know, Rax draws,
Rax
draws
draws cars, it's true.
so good. And his drawing, beautiful drawing show, and the figures in this painting of the St. John's Cathedral, I mean, it's so very cool, beautiful. But it's just an
So
interesting.
Sorry.
Well, and he
Tony is not on the panel, but he's just saying thank you, Stanley, and letting us know he's here. But I
Well,
think his
that's good.
figures really look like they belong. They just
Well,
somehow.
that was what I was saying, that, you know, all of these incidents, I mean, there's obviously the big move of this explosion of trees in the middle. And then as you wander around, all these pinks are taking you through, and the swings and the figures, the swings, the branches. I mean, it's all of a piece. It's,
Oh,
Because
man, it is.
yeah.
I love the mission in this painting.
Yeah, and I think the figures are kind of optimized. I mean, you know, the figures are moving.
Yeah,
And so I think Tony picked the best place for them.
yeah,
Like in the one of the other ones before I think the very brightest note is one of the figures.
Yeah.
The one on the right.
right.
Yeah.
That one
Yeah.
light is
I love this
is a
painting.
figure.
Yeah.
Seems to me like that maybe there are two ways to have figures in painting, at least for me. One, you know, I think of Corot, and he would like put in a red dot to make the composition, you know, kind of just right. But for me, what works better is if I have figures, if I start with a figure, I mean, I sort of feel sometimes that I don't, like they should be important, and I guess you know, I struggle with are they just there for the composition? I don't know, not just, but you know, I guess the centrality of the figure seems to be an issue.
Especially
Well-
if it's a city or a town and people are walking all the time.
People.
You know, I want to mention this. People put down Utrillo. I love Utrillo. He's one of my favorite painters. And the figures in he has these sort of little almost cartoony like figures just plopped in these late landscapes. I think he's the greatest. Anybody want to comment?
There's another approach, great historical precedent. Claude Lorrain usually had somebody else paint his figures for him because he didn't think he painted them well enough.
Excellent.
And so somebody here in the audience in the Q&A, Colleen Frank, has said that Rackstraw hired figures to stand. And she said in one case, the person mailed the letter 20 times so that he could paint that person doing that. And also Tony says he's thinking of scale and movement when he puts in his figures. And as Howard said, Corot was on his mind.
Well,
Yeah.
it shows.
The bicycle.
I was going to say, I tell my students with figures or cars to paint a part of the car or the figure the first time someone walks through. Someone else will walk in the same spot later.
That's
It
what
doesn't
I
all have to
do.
happen at once.
That's what I say too.
Uh-huh. Well,
Well,
you're
maybe we
certainly,
should go ahead.
you seem to be, we don't have to worry about figures in your paintings, but we certainly have a sense of the seasons.
Well, I mean, I did a group of figure paintings, and it was mainly about the figure in the garden.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Oh,
Yeah.
those are
I
wonderful.
love those.
So
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, you've got women doing all kinds of things that they aren't supposed to be doing in the garden in the nude.
Yeah, I saw that show at the studio school, I think it was.
Yeah.
And the title of it was Women Working.
Mhm.
They're doing their
And
work in the nude
And
in
you
the
showed
garden.
them and you showed them in Maine too. I saw that show.
yeah. One of
Yes.
those figures was a model that every week we went and drew from her. But the ones in the garden were basically friends who would come and sit and paint in the garden. So I'd paint them painting in the garden.
Mhm.
That got to be a good deal for me, that they would come and sit. Another friend, she was
Yes,
painting the
yeah.
flowers, so I was painting her painting.
Uh-huh.
You know, it just occurred to me, here's a free model. So all this stuff is accidental, you know, none of it is planned
Yeah,
for me. You
Eh,
suddenly
yeah.
stumble across something. It's like things when you're driving in a car, you might suddenly see a wonderful landscape. But then the problem is when you come back there, it's not there. And the reason it's not there is it's not the same time of day, it's not the same weather, it just isn't there anymore. So what you saw was like a wonderful painting illusion. And
yes.
Mhm.
I'm sure
And if
you're
you get, like, if you go out with, some of
that
us go out and
experience.
paint with other, sorry, with other friends, painters, and we all look in different directions and the paintings are different and we see different things, and yeah, we're inspired by different things, even though we're in the same place.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Camilla,
And
are
usually the
the-
Q&A is,
Before we get to the
it-
Q&A, I'd like to hear, we were asking Camilla about her relationship to changing seasons and place.
Yeah. So like many of you, I start outside or I paint outside, and I often paint entirely plein air paintings, but the series, and recently I've actually been bringing them back into the studio. These are watercolors and screen print, and continuing to work on them in the studio. So some of that is from memory, not from photographs, but from either some of my own work or imagination. And then I think I sort of am after something intuitive of kind of what could make this painting whole, or what feeling did it evoke when I was there. So it's maybe more of a record of my time spent thinking about that landscape in some ways, and less of a, you know, straightforward painting.
And there are places that you're very familiar with?
They
Or-
are. So I'm
Yeah.
up in the Catskills, not far from Tema. So similarly, I used to travel much more for residencies, or, you know, and come home with, you know, sometimes paintings of, you know, a Danish beach or an Icelandic waterfall or something that, and sometimes that was difficult because I didn't connect so much to those landscapes. And even when something is very picturesque, I also find it sometimes difficult to paint. And in the Catskills, I've become much more aware of sort of the ecology of the land. And these are blueberry bushes that we planted, but how do they relate to the wildness of the ridge behind? So sort of thinking more about vegetation and seasons and light, and yeah, coming back and looking at our little pond and a cloud goes by, it's a totally different painting. And then you either choose to chase that or start another painting, or so yeah, it's
Blueberry
endless.
painting looks fabulous. Beautiful.
Thank you. Thanks,
Yeah.
Stanley.
There's a whole wall of fabulous ones. Well, you know, you just summed up the experience so well. I think maybe what we should do now is I'll stop sharing my screen. We should go back to gallery view and let's take some questions. I keep getting a notice saying 2 people have their hands up. I don't know quite what to do about that, but maybe you know what to do about that. But I'm sure we have questions. And we've got.
well, I know there was one question right at the very beginning. I think it's for Lois, and the person asks, why Masonite? Why
What?
do you use Masonite? Why do you use Masonite to paint?
Because it's cheap. You can get it cut up at the lumber yard. It takes gesso very nicely. It's portable. If you drop it, it doesn't break. For all kinds of practical reasons, I use by Masonite. Yeah, and it seems to hold up. I mean, I've never had anybody say the painting fell off or
Yeah.
dissolved or did anything weird. So I think it seems to be as sturdy as almost any other support.
And you like working on a hard surface, obviously.
Yes, I do. I like, yeah, the wall would be good, and the Masonite is like painting on the wall. Yeah.
The reason
Yeah,
I like
don't like, you're right. I've had stretched canvases And if they're small, they really make me nervous because they give. You touch
Uh-huh.
them and they give. If it's big and it's linen, somehow linen is more crisp and it's more like a wall or masonite, something of that nature. But I cannot work on cotton canvas. I can't do it. It just can't paint what I start on something like that. It's so weird how personal every touch
Yeah.
is.
You're very good on aluminum.
I like aluminum. That's nice too. Yeah. Yeah. Aluminum, masonite, and linen.
And then John's paintings are all on Arches paper, right, John?
Well, a lot of them are the Arches oil paper, which you don't have to prime or anything. And it's interesting because it kind of encourages a watercolor technique. And I've done quite a bit of watercolor and also oil paint. So you end up with this kind of hybrid technique, half transparent, half, but you can build it up opaquely like an oil painting. So I do like that paper.
Well, in spite of telling people to put the questions in the Q&A, they seem to put them all in the chat. But Elizabeth, you were fielding them for us.
Yes, yeah, and I've been going through them. Some of them I've asked along the way, and someone, Colleen Franke, responded to what Stanley said earlier, that Al Kresh told him, paint your backyard. And he said also to her, draw your dirty dishes.
That's cool. Yeah.
I guess it's the old adage, paint what you know, write what you know.
know. Yeah, write what you know.
And if you're a bad housekeeper, you're painting your dirty dishes.
One of my students at the studio school, who's beginning to get some attention paid to her, but very interesting figurative painter called Rachel Rickert. Her thesis show was she had a very small one-room apartment, and she just painted her entire small environment, including her very messy closet. And one of the best paintings in the show was of her bra hanging on the knob of the door.
So there are
Definitely
two
painting.
hands raised here, which we could allow to speak. We have John Bradford and
Oh, why don't you
Sashka Ross.
unmute
yeah.
John and then the
Okay.
other person?
Okay, talking is permitted from John now. If you unmute, I believe you have to do that now.
He has to do it. There we
Can you hear
go.
me?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. I didn't know how to actually get onto the.
We can hear you, but we can't
Wonderful
see you.
show. Everybody is, just all my heroes. I'm a little intoxicated, but let's go forward. You present this view, from Corot on forward, and it's just such a wonderful thing. But it's such a, we're so attenuated. It's just there's such an attack. These people are heroes. In the contemporary art world, Karen, really, we're the idea. Okay, I'm not going to go on. It's not just everything everybody said is absolutely true, but it's in the context of attenuated culture.
Well, if we start on that, John, we're going to be here for another 6 hours minimum. But the question which I was thinking about asking, and maybe I shouldn't. Landscape obviously has to do with the environment. And of course, I'm going to throw it out here. With all the anxiety and the attention surrounding climate change and what it's doing to the environment, is that affecting your approach to the landscape at all? Do you feel any pressure to address that, or is it just internalized like everything else?
Well, I can say one thing about that is it's more dangerous being outside the storms. You're out there and these huge storms come up, and sometimes they're scary, you know. You think, oh, I'll just stay here, you know, I'll hang out there, and there's more for me anyway. I'm older, you know, and I feel like I'm gonna keep painting outside, but the wind is the worst thing for landscape painting. How do you paint with the wind? And there's more violent weather, it seems. Maybe I'm just making it up, but
There's
I
definitely
thi- I
more
think-
violent weather.
Yeah,
It
no, I
is.
think there is the practical aspect, and I wouldn't say that I feel pressure to paint about it, but I am aware of it. And I think that's maybe one way that I think about the comfort that I get from nature. And I think people see nature, see the landscape through artists' eyes. So if I can find a sense of wholeness or presence through my work, I would hope that that could be a comfort to others too. So I do think about it.
I think,
I might,
I was just going to say, I intrinsically feel the effects of how the world is changing around me in terms of climate, I guess. But I think for all of us here on this panel, the natural world serves as an inspiration to us all in all of our work. And I think we are so privileged. It's a privilege, really, to look at this beautiful world and interpret it and give it back in some form in our work. So
and
Right.
I was
I
going to
think
say,
that's
my
you.
my studio for the past 30 years is in the Gowanus Canal area of Brooklyn, and Camilla's studio is in the same building. But I've been really painting the canal a lot for the past 30 years, and it's a toxic site. It's, you know, very contaminated, and you know, a lot of pollution in the water. But in some ways, when, you know, the more it gets gentrified now, there's less for me to paint there, which is interesting.
yeah.
So we have
Well,
3 more
you know,
hands raised. Should I go?
Okay,
Should
Why don't
we,
we
allow-
let those people
Okay.
speak? Thank you,
Okay, so-
John.
now the next person has to unmute. Shaska.
I've really been so interested to see this group historically of landscape painters, and I'm connected to Howard from a few years ago. So that got me interested in this whole webinar, and I'm thrilled that you've all been present to speak. So I just wanted to thank you for that. I don't have a question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So next up is Lori Sanford Ross. I'm going to try to allow to talk.
Unmute yourself, Lori.
I don't
Hello.
have a question. Hi, everyone. I don't have a question.
Oh,
I don't know how but since you called on me, I'll just say thanks, everyone. It's a beautiful show, and I've seen it once. I'll be coming back. And great panel, Karen.
thank you,
and
Lori.
It's a
Thank you,
beautiful
Lori.
show. Bye.
Bye. Okay,
The studio school forever. Yeah.
Ro Lowen is up next.
Oh,
and,
boy.
Hi,
okay.
Ro.
Hi, Ro.
so-
Are you
Hey.
still,
Ro.
are you still in Mexico?
No, I'm here.
Okay.
No, I can't wait to see the show, and I love all the painters in the show, but I do think about Cezanne all the time when it comes to landscapes. And I love Corot, but I'm just wondering, does Cezanne play into any of your thinking? The profound increment of Cezanne and the moment of seeing and its difference from another place is just something I can't disregard when I'm painting the landscape. And I'd like to know how he figures into your work.
Well,
I
I
think he
think
just
for me,
back.
Cezanne makes more explicit the difficulties of painting. I find both remarkable painters, but Cezanne
Me
really
too.
see the struggle and then the process behind it. But I'm not sure either's the greater because of that. I mean, I think you look at Crow as patches of color. They're remarkable constructions too.
you know, speaking as a pedantic art historian, I mean, you can't ignore, you can't think about modernism without thinking about Cézanne. He completely changes the space in painting for the first time since the Renaissance. And every young artist in Paris who saw the 1907 tribute exhibition, he organized a year after his death, was affected by it, changed everything. Everyone was affected in a different way, but nobody who was any good escaped unscathed from seeing that show. Of course, Picasso, who turned anyone who I think threatened him into a woman, called Cézanne a mother who protects her children. He called Braque his wife, so you can extrapolate from that. But everybody, you know, everybody was deeply, deeply transformed by him. And I think still is on some level because of his changing all the rules.
So could one of the artists speak about his influence and how I
Well,
guess
I could say,
Past, a part of, you know, of all the art one's seen. I mean, Cézanne is always there. You know, he's always part of your, you know, he's one of the great painters and one thinks of him, you know, and he affects you in some way because you're still painting and you're doing all the things that he was struggling with. I think, I mean, you might not be painting like him, but he's very much there. I think, anyway.
I think that's absolutely
The
accurate.
way he paints or whatever.
I think the phenomenal in, you know, what's painted in this show is it's like, it's not so much a scene, but it's the phenomena of perception. I mean, we look and we're engaged in the process of looking, and there's Cézanne had this honesty, maybe characterized almost as a dumbness to the classical way of laying out a painting, but he was open to the phenomena that was in front of him, that he perceived. And I think pretty much all the paintings in the show speak to that.
I think that's very accurate. Charles Cajori used to say that he thought the disjunctions in Cézanne, the way, you know, one touch and then another touch and another touch, were an echo of the process of looking at your motif and then looking at what you're working on. And that shift in vision is translated into this kind of mark making. But I think Tema summed it up beautifully. I mean, he's,
You know, where I saw that,
everyone's DNA.
what about that drawing show, that Cézanne drawing?
Oh boy.
show? That
Yeah.
was just unbelievable. I was so amazed by these drawings where he would sort of have empty areas. Like, what was he doing? I mean, it's so interesting that there would be these just empty, he'd draw his wife, and then there'd be a hole. And I thought it was so. Ro, what do you think of that?
well, it's gone off from where I originally was thinking. I love that show, and I totally respect what all you guys are doing. There's something like I can't go back to things configurating in a way that is about something I can represent and depict. I'm stuck with pulling everything apart, and I think I have to pin it on Cézanne. I know I'm talking about my own work right now, but just where my thinking is going.
So will I move on to?
I think we have time for a few more questions.
So mostly there were questions coming in that were related to the discussion, so I put them to the group as they came up. but there are a couple of additional ones. Someone here says, as anonymous says, Hans Hofmann's teachings were important to many of the New York Studio School's founding faculty. In what ways might you see how Hans Hofmann's teaching about color as light have on your landscapes?
Oh,
Anybody like to
I
answer
want
that?
to say, I can say something about Al. I
Yes.
asked Al, I kept asking him, what is it that you're doing relates to your Hofmann? And you know, artists don't like to talk about that very much. And I don't think I ever got an answer from him, but he seemed to me one of the clearest examples of a painter who's thinking Hofmann, areas playing against each other, color, you know, a high color, bright, more intense colors, pushing in the top against things, and he's, for me, my example of a Hofmann idea is really being worked out. I think he was. Does anybody else agree with that? About
Well, Al's paintings are, you know, that Hoffman kind of structure is in them, no matter how they're painted.
Well, it's the Hoffman push, pull. I mean, at Parsons Grad School, Leland, Paul, Stanley, you two, and Al Crash always talked about the push and pull with regard to color and how color is used to create space. And I think we're all products of the Hoffman school, whether or not we really.
And I think William Christine's work, very much the color is that creating space and push and pull.
Good point.
Well, and color wants to create space, so in a way you're letting it be what it does, just organizing its impulses, I think.
But you know, there's an opposite point of view though that I got from Leland, and he would look at he would show paintings from certain Renaissance painters with this sort of green brown thing, and also that's part of this Corot thing, and that's the other side. And Leland wasn't a Hoffman. You never heard him, you know, say positive things. He wouldn't say anything at all, but that was not his thing.
He was not a Hoffman student.
No, he
did not study
other way of seeing through the Corot and Derain. And I just wanted to say one thing. In Leland's apartment, there was these little Derain studies. They were about this big.
What you say?
And they were like quickly done. And Lois, that relates to your painting, they were quick and they hold it all together in a small picture. There's something great about them. And it's not a Cézanne thing. I don't know what it is, but it has something to do with the spirit of responding quickly and pulling it all together. Anyway,
well, I like
But
to,
Hoffman's structural kind of color it's very intense. It's mouth puckeringly acidic sometimes. It's very German. And it's also coming out of Cézanne's kind of structuring with tone and color. Hoffman didn't, you know, spring full blown from the forehead of Zeus.
No, that's right. I think I understand it too. But
well,
these are questions that really drive everybody crazy. And we, you know, and you don't solve these questions. I mean, I'm painting all day, this and that, and I'm thinking about all these discussions from way back in graduate school days. It's the same stuff pouring through my mind. There's no resolution to this stuff. If we all sat together, we could really go crazy together. Just whoa, you'd be in there too, and we'd all probably get pretty angry after a while.
Well,
This is tough stuff.
But then,
Well,
then
we
when you
committed, Stanley.
Stanley, remember what Paul Resica said about art and not
Well, what
always
did he-
having to figure everything out, how the mystery of it all. Like,
Well, I
we're
think
talking-
before we all drive each other completely crazy, this
Yeah,
might
yeah.
be a good time to call it a night. Because we're not going to solve any of this. It's going to
No.
keep us engaged for forever. So thank you all enormously for doing this.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
all for
Karen.
coming.
This was a
Yeah.
lot of
Thank
fun,
you, Karen.
really. I really enjoyed this.
So did I.
Thanks,
And I
everybody.
hope everyone in the audience did too.